We've got one more presentation before lunch. I'm going to call up Josie Hart. She's the farm program manager at the Denver Botanic Gardens, and she came down yesterday and just said she started to melt. It's still snowing up there. And I shared a title with her for this presentation. It was, you guys have your People, Place, Purpose, and Profit. And she goes, I like that. So I'm going to bring up her slides, and you're right before lunch. No pressure.
That just makes me go quicker because I'm hungry. So I'm really glad to be here. I also am a little stressed out being here. This is our very, very busiest season. Currently, my team is planting 18,000 onion plants, followed by 6,000 brassica plants, and then we're doing 4,000 annual cut flower plants. And that's just for the next 2 weeks. So can you all hear me okay? Because this mic sounds like it's kind of going in and out, but yeah, let me grab this pointer. So many of you were on the tour at our farm last year. You got to see in person a lot of our practices and a lot of the farming we have going on there, and also kind of the space overall. So I am going to get a little bit more in depth with some of the farming, but I first would like to point out the amazing space of Chatfield Farms. It was basically homesteaded 160 years ago. There's been agriculture on the site ever since. We have extensive wetland areas and native plant habitats. We have an existing beautiful canopy of cottonwoods and willows that were there following the Deer Creek, and a ton of wildlife. And I think this might be the laser. Let's see. Yes. So this is basically the Hogback Morrison Formation. Chatfield has a giant watershed and animal corridor all the way through here. So these are the foothills. This is about 6,000, a little over 6,000 feet where we farm. And then our farm is kind of right here in the middle area of this. So we do have a lot of natural moisture. We have a creek that runs now because of our restoration work almost all year round. And before, when I first started working there, our creek would stop running after June. Now we have water, beautiful, abundant amounts of water, almost all the way through the year. And many of you, when you were there, got to see the flooding that was happening. It was very exciting. So in the last several years, we've really received a lot of rainfall. And it's wonderful because a lot of our plantings that we originally started without irrigation are now flourishing. And I am much more hopeful about starting additional food forests without irrigation due to this recent rainfall. And of course, I know once we get it all planted, it'll probably go back to being really dry again, but that's how it is. Anyway, it's super beautiful here. And then right here is the reservoir that was created in the 60s, Chatfield Reservoir. So this entire area, our farm, is really a nature preserve. It always was. And we love kind of combining the farming with the restoration and conservation aspects. And then we also, let me come back over here a little bit. We also have agritourism. So Chris's title mentioned profit, right? We are a nonprofit. We are a botanic garden. We're an educational entity. We're open to the public every single day of the week, but we also need to make a profit. We also need to pay for all of the programs that we want to sustain, to reach people, to teach them about small scale sustainable farming, to teach them about where their food comes from, to teach them about seed saving and conservation. So we do focus on also how we can profit, how we can make money with this. So our small scale regenerative farm programs are basically a CSA, a community outreach program where we go out into the community and we set up food distributions. Everything is donated, and we work with existing partners in neighborhoods that would be culturally relevant to the neighbors. So we don't try to do everything. We grow the food and we deliver the food to the areas that need it. And then we connect with partners that are already on the ground, already have community relationships built for the produce to be donated. We have supporting shareholders and farm to fork dinners. And basically what that is we have some shareholders that are willing to pay a lot more for their CSA share to basically donate to the program so that we can bring people together and have dinners and offset some of the donation costs for that produce. So every time we're bringing produce to a neighborhood to donate it, we know that the cost has already been covered by very willing donors. And so we have a huge donor base at the Denver Botanic Gardens. I do have to spend a lot of my time cultivating those donors and working with those relationships, but it's really great to see when we get them together for a farm to fork dinner, they're more than happy to do it. And most of the time those donors will say, what more can we do? How else can we give? Which is really powerful. Our compost program directly is connected with our regenerative practices. And I want to be very clear about regenerative. We follow practices. We are not a regenerative farm. We have about 4 of the main practices or principles that we are dedicated to, which is the soil health practices. So we keep our soil covered. We do conservation tillage. We do till, but we usually only use power harrows, which is a way of going over the soil only about 2 to 3 inches deep and stirring the soil instead of turning the soil all the way over in one pass. So that's what conservation tillage is. We also have a lot of our production spaces where we don't till at all, where we broad fork and we use hand tools and cover cropping very intensively with compost, and we don't use any mechanized equipment. But we are not regenerative. We just try to follow those principles and we try to do the best that we can, but we also are feeding 350 families every week. And that means that we have succession plantings like crazy, and we have to turn and burn, right? We have to plant a crop, we have to harvest a crop, we have to get it out, and we have to put another crop in. And so to be completely no-till, I think would probably be the death of all my farmers. So we're really happy to have some of that mechanization and some of those power tools and tractors to kind of help us get through the season with being able to provide enough food. We love demonstrating those regenerative practices. And we try to stick to them. But one of the main things that kind of keeps us from being a true regenerative farm is that we don't incorporate animals. We are a botanic garden, and so we're showcasing the crops that we then harvest and feed to people. So it's a very weird kind of oddball fit because we're trying to make our food look pretty because it's kind of a botanic garden and a museum where people walk through and look, and then we're going to pull it out of the ground and feed it to people. And so we can't let animals loose on a botanic garden, right? That would kind of be insane. We do have goats, we do have a couple sheep, we have a pig, we have chickens, but they do have to stay away from all of the production zones because we have so many ornamental gardens too. They would love to let themselves loose and just kind of regeneratively like tear out all of the plants, and that wouldn't be a good idea. So really that's what keeps us from being a true kind of closed loop regenerative system. I really do believe that animals are the answer to soil health. I truly believe that. We have a lot of soil health principles that we follow, and I will tell you that it's extremely hard being no-till to not eventually have to go back to tilling without having animals help to till the soil. And I can get way into that, but this is kind of a quick overview. So, of course, we do all this work through a lot of strategic partnerships. The city of Denver has been amazing. We do work with our extension. We do work with a lot of different soil scientists and agronomists. And we also work with the community. We have a bunch of different educational opportunities at the farm that I'll talk about in a minute. Yes. So are you referring to the white that you see? So that is a fabric that's called remay. Some people call it floating row cover, and some people call it there's another name that I'm forgetting right now, agribon. But basically that covers the crops. So it provides a microclimate, a little bit of warmth if it's a cooler, like beginning of the season. It also provides pest control. So we have heavy pest pressure on a lot of our crops like brassicas and our cucurbits. So if we keep everything covered, those little bugs can't land on the plants. And then when we take it off for pollination, it actually shakes bugs off. We let the crops get pollinated and then we cover it back up again. So in some of the photos, you may see about 70% of all of our crops stay covered for almost the entire growing season. It's really, really useful. And if you're not using floating row cover on vegetables, please start doing so. So here's a picture of some of our beets. But yeah, so we have very intensive growing techniques. And the reason for that is really just maximizing your space. Traditional farming has anywhere from like 2 to 3 feet in between rows of crops. So of course you can get your tractor or your equipment down through those rows. So we kind of do the opposite. You can see here is our actual quote unquote row where you would have an aisle where people would walk. That's less than a foot wide. This is our bed. Every single bed is also standardized. So we have 30-inch beds and 1 foot pathways. It does make it very tight. It makes it hard to get through, but all small scale market farming in the States and in Europe is going that direction to be 30 inches by 1 foot. And so that makes it really nice because the small scale implements that we're using are all based on that sizing. So it's really becoming standardized across the states and it's super helpful to us. We also use mostly drip irrigation. You can kind of see these are our drip valves, but of course, because we cover crops so intensely, we can't just have drip. So every irrigation system we put in is basically 1-inch header piping with drip all throughout. And then we also have what they're calling micro wobblers or micro sprayers. And that is basically a very simple system that you can build yourself where you create little tiny micro sprayers that water about 3 beds at a time. And that way we can cover crop extensively, but we can also get great germination on things like beets and carrots that we direct seed into the soil. So every single system has to have overhead and drip, and it's very laborious. And I'm the one that usually is putting those little rigs and systems together. And I've already gotten 3 text messages this morning that some of our systems got destroyed by our construction people. So drip irrigation is very fickle. It falls apart, but at the same time, it's absolutely the most useful, beneficial way of watering crops. Some farmers that I know use only overhead systems and you lose a lot of water that way through condensation and evaporation, but also you're watering everything. So you're watering all of the weeds that want to be there instead of just the crop that needs the water. So very dedicated to drip, but also you need some overhead too. Again, we try to minimize disturbance of our soil. So we use a lot of broad forks. The cover crops really are selected to break up any kind of soil issues that we have. So if we have compaction, then we will plant tillage radishes and turnips. If we have lower nutrients, we will plant legumes that fix nitrogen. And we always do a mix of any cover crop that we have. So typically our cover crop mixes for the spring have about 9 to maybe 15 species in there. And then our cover crops that we have for the fall, same thing, have about 10 species that all serve different purposes. We also do a lot of dormant seeding. So we will put cover crop into the ground right at the end of our season in November, and it won't do anything. It will just sit in the soil. And then in the very early spring, in February, it will get enough moisture that in March it starts germinating on its own. And so we use a lot of cover crop that way too, just by kind of top dressing the soil with cover crop seed and then waiting for it to come up in the early spring. So again, why would you do this? We want to minimize our inputs. We want to limit how much time we're spending in our fields. So we don't want them all spread out everywhere. We want them to be close together and highly efficient so we can move through those fields in a quick manner. And we grow up to 100 different vegetable crops. So of course, that's a lot of little tiny micro situations for each vegetable that you have to manage. So you want them to be close together. Just some pictures of our carrots. We probably sow about 7 successive plantings of carrots throughout the season. So every couple of weeks, our farmers are using our seed drills or our hand seeders, and they're seeding those carrots in so that we have a nice steady supply of carrots all the way throughout the growing season. We also do that with beets, and we also do that with hawker-eye turnips because that's a big favorite of our CSA members. Here's a picture of our market garden. This is one of our no-till spaces. This is an educational space where the general public can come through. We have signage. We have ambassadors that are on hand to answer questions that people might have about the vegetables or about the flowers. You can also see we use a lot of landscape fabric. That's just to keep the weeds down and to give the farmers access to being able to get into those crops without it being sort of weedy and messy. And we also do a lot of interplanting. So over here, this is one of our flower blocks. We grow everything in blocks so that we know every plant that's in that block has to be cared for in a similar manner and has to be harvested in a similar manner. So it's broken up that way. Our flowers are great for pollination and just, biodiversity on the farm in general, but also bring in a lot of income for us. I'm sure you guys are all aware of the dahlia craze that's going on. We have a 100-foot hoop house that's dedicated only to dahlia production. And every dahlia bouquet that we harvest, I think we sell between like 25 to 35 bucks for like 4 or 5 dahlias. So it's big money. Once you figure out how to produce dahlias, they're really not any harder than any other plant, and they generate a ton of income for us. So yeah, on the right here is a Johnson Sioux bioreactor project. This is our Veterans to Farmers program. We educate veterans on how to do small scale agriculture, and we also have a compost and soil program that is basically funded by those same donors I was talking about. The people who are our CSA members are very passionate about sustainability and making our farm regenerative. And so they donate money so we can have someone make the best biodiverse compost possible and add it to our fields. So he does foliar sprays, he does compost applications, he does vermicomposting where he uses worms and harvests the worm castings. And then he also does soil drenches. He does a little bit, he's fooling around right now with keyline, not necessarily for planting for windbreaks, but more for remediation of our soils when we have really depleted or compacted soils. He's used a keyline plow and then done a drench within that to try to get nutrients deeper into the soil levels. So that's a little scary for me though, because I don't want to till a lot. And here he is with this giant deep plow trying to cut holes into the farm and pour soil drenches in there, but we know that it's important to do. So we do a little bit of that research and just kind of playing around with how to improve our soil always. That's one of our biggest goals. We do work with the NRCS. Not so much for funding because we have so many grants that we're managing already in the NRCS. I have found sometimes is a little bit like paperwork intensive, no offense, but so we don't really work with the NRCS in that capacity, but we work with them to have them come out and tell us how we're doing with our soil. So they have a little soil report card and it's great. We're at a B+ right now. And we're really, really happy with our B plus because, we were kind of wondering, well, we have perennial weed pressure. We do have to till, so maybe our soil isn't so great. And coming out with a B plus, we were really happy. Most of our soil right now is either at about a 4.5% organic matter all the way up to an 8%. So that's really rich, really awesome. The result of a lot of hard work. So you can kind of see here our little system. We use a lot of silage tarps to kill our cover crop. So we basically cover crop and then we silage tarp. And then this is a power harrow on a walk behind tractor. And we go through and we harrow after the cover crop is mostly dead from the silage tarp. So that's kind of our system that we work through. And then of course, all of the organic matter from harvest or whatever we keep within the field to kind of build that in. And then we'll power harrow through that too, or just broad fork in all of our green matter. A new project we're working on are additional windbreaks. So we've been working with elderberry and native willow, and we take cuttings and reroot them, and then we plant them into little hedgerows so that we can have a windbreak, but also everyone loves elderberry syrup right now. So we've started making a lot of elderberry syrup, and we're going to be making it in a certified kitchen to be able to sell it to our CSA members. Right now, it's just kind of like a community sharing program of sharing elderberry syrup, but also really enjoying those elderberry bushes for the windbreak. So value added as well. We sell honey. We have these hops growing. And so we started a beer festival. We have someone that makes sauerkraut from all of our cabbages. We have a ton of different value added products. We mostly just supply the raw ingredients to the makers that then make it in certified kitchens. This is a picture of some of the cooking classes we have. We do indigenous cooking classes from all around the world so people can learn about different cultural ways of preparing the fresh vegetables and food that we offer. So after you all were out on our farm a year ago, I kind of took a deep dive into the agroforestry project that pretty much was started at Chatfield as a result of the farm bill that came out, I think, in the early 80s. And you can see here, this is a really cool picture. This is the original contour planting of some of our windbreak agroforestry projects. This was done by someone named Chris Hartung. He is actually still in communication with us. He has an amazing nursery in Canyon City that's called Desert Canyon. And he planted all of the trees that are kind of planted in the contour rows at Chatfield. You can see here, this is coming into our property. On the right, it's a very, very lush canopy of different trees. And on the left here, it's really small and sparse. And so I asked him, what happened there? And he said he had to flood irrigate all of the plantings in the beginning to get things established. And so the water pretty much just ran downhill and it settled here in this contour and really watered those trees in. And then just these stayed dry. So you can see the difference. This is about 30 years old. 35 years old. You can see how dry and small and stunted those plants are. Here's a great picture of some of our canopy, and this is both the original cottonwoods, but then a lot of the intentional sort of, alley trees and windbreak trees that were planted on our property. Here's some more aerial photos. He really got into planting some pretty crazy stuff. You can see that list there, the soapberry, the jack oak, southwestern white pine. But we basically in 2020 did an assessment of all of the trees and what their survival rates were looking like. And we were able to assess that about 70% of the original plantings all throughout the 80s and the up to the mid 90s, about 70% has survived. And the reason for that is because he did use landscape fabric in those plantings and he did stretch irrigation through a lot of the plantings. So the original plantings on the property, I think it was about 50 to 60% was all irrigated. So it's super important, but I think Yeah, you can see down here. Here's another little windbreak area that he created, and that was irrigated, but it is so helpful because we have prevailing winds that come off this hogback, and it really destroys all of our crops in here. This is our corn maze. So when our corn maze is getting planted, the wind can be so destructive with tiny little corn plants and just bringing our topsoil away too. So the trees were, yeah, they're huge for our agriculture, basically, very helpful. Here's another aerial picture. You can see some of the pumpkin festival we have and the corn maze. We recently started basically making $1 million with our corn and pumpkin crops. So now we call it the $1 million crop. So yes, we are trying to create some profit, but also I'm sure this is making some people sad to see all that exposed soil. So this picture is about, I think, 2.5 years old. Since then, we have started cover cropping this entire field with winter wheat. It's not a very fancy cover crop, but it is a cover crop. We do that dormant seeding. So we run seeders through in the fall and then it comes up in the spring. But I will tell you, it is so much work to try to terminate a cover crop that big and be able to plant into it within about a month window. So cover cropping on a larger scale, we're finding is really a big challenge unless you're going all the way no-till and you're putting those seeds directly into the dead cover crop and leaving it there. We haven't gotten a large scale no-till seed drill yet. They're about $40,000. So that's on our list of things that we want to do. But we have been able to really make this pretty profitable. We also have a lot of native grasses and pollinator gardens. We restore the creek bed with cottonwood and willow. And we have a whole team of scientists that are interns that have been helping out with that project. And like I said, now we have water that runs through it pretty much every single month of the year. These are our educational programs that we have. I mentioned our Veterans to Farmers. It's probably the most special program that we have. We've been working with this organization for 10 years, and we have veterans that come out onto our farm for 21 weeks, which is almost the full season. And so it's very transformative. We do a lot of wellness work and mindfulness with them, and then they get to go on to create a business plan, and then they apply to us, and we have three $10,000 seed grants that we give the three top participants at the end of the season. And that really is able to jumpstart their farming career. And it can be a business, an enterprise, or farming. It doesn't have to just be farming. It could be maybe making soap with botanical products or something like that. But we do offer a financial incentive to people who take the program seriously, and they love it. And they really establish a pretty close connection with each other throughout the year. So the big project that I've been super busy with right now, we are starting an agrivoltaic farm. It's 5.5 acres. We have raised up solar panels that are raised up to about 9 feet. So farmers can walk all the way underneath the solar panels without hitting their heads, and to ensure that there's a lot of sunlight that gets through to all of the areas of this farm. This is an example from Jack's solar farm. You can see here someone's harvesting string beans, and then they have rows of carrots. And this is going to be very, very similar to what we're doing on the farm. So I have been very busy because it's just beginning right now. So it's a pretty huge project. And then, yeah, just some more of the products that we harvest and that we source for local makers to kind of keep us financially solvent and to really just be able to provide beautiful, great products and sourcing to our whole community around in Denver. This is our impact report from 2022. The reason I'm sharing this one is because this was the most produce that we donated to the community. So 19,000 pounds to a ton of different amazing partners. And that's it. Thank you.
Thank you. I think we got time for one question from Donna. Before I hand that off, so the food is out there and ready for us. We do have an hour and a half for lunch. So big window so we can network, get around and talk with your neighbors. So thank you so much, Josie. Um, hold up here because the people online can't hear your question.
Josie, there's so many wonderful things we could say about you, and we're glad you're here. I just had one question on the bioremediation. That was just a little blurb at the end there. What are you up to?
Yeah, sorry, I had so much. I mean, obviously, this is a huge farm, right? It's 700 acres. So we have a lot going on. Bioremediation right now, we're working on a couple of broadleaf herbicides that we discovered by testing our compost. And we have our compost isolated. And so we're using sunflowers and we're using sun hemp to grow over the top of the compost in maybe 3 to 4 generations to try to see if the sunflower and the sun hemp can basically draw the rest of that herbicide out of the compost. A, so we can use the compost eventually, but B, so we can start looking into, a mix of sunflower and sun hemp over swaths of acreage where maybe they were spraying beforehand. So that's one thing that we're looking at. We're also looking at biochar that's been inoculated with different fungi mixes. And I will tell you, I'm so sorry. I don't want to be a hater, but we have found zero benefit from biochar. It's really takes a lot of work to make, and our yields and our soil health indicators really have not changed since we've been using biochar. And you're kind of maybe agreeing. It's messy and it's like it takes a lot of work. And then we haven't really seen much of a difference, but we were looking at biochar mixed with mycelium to try to do some remediation again with areas that have been sprayed and areas that have been degraded by over tillage. And the data is still out because it takes about 5 years to do this type of work and then get someone to analyze it and then get someone to report on it. But I will share it with you all when that comes.
Thank you again, Josie.